Hi, welcome back to Eclectic Movie Reviews. And the day of this recording is October 19th, 2023, which is 12 days till Halloween. And with that in mind, I decided to do a video giving my spooky season recommendations for uh for Halloween 2023. Uh now the my first I'm gonna talk about 10 movies here. Uh, I have 10 picks here, and I will list them not in order of preference, but alphabetically, as I typically do. And the first one, this is not a horror movie, but it sort of has ghost story elements. So I, at least for me, it's fitting for Halloween season, even though it takes place around Easter time. Uh, it could be fitting for both, and that is Martin Scorsese's 1999 film Bringing Out the Dead, with a screenplay by Paul Schrader based off of a novel by Joe Connolly, I believe. Yeah. So, uh, the narrative follows a paramedic named Frank Pierce, played by Nick Cage, and uh, Scorsese really captures the nonstop overwhelm these people face, particularly at nighttime. And it sort of made me think of After Hours in that regard, with the cliche saying, New York, the city that never sleeps. And there's one scene early in the film where a guy in the hospital is trying to ask for a bottle of water and nobody's handing it to him. And that made me think of the first act of Beau is Afraid, uh, which is in the first act of that film. As I said in a in my in a video I gave earlier, uh, in the summer, very much uh, in July, um, the very first act of Beau's Afraid very much reminded me of After Hours, and so, but that's different discussion. So we follow Pierce over a 3 day or night period, and on each of these nights, Pierce is accompanied by three partners, the first of which is played by John Goodman. He's quite funny here. The second one is Marcus, played by Ving Rhames. And the third being Tom, played by Tom Sizemore, rest in peace. And Pierce is suffering from the trauma of failing to save a pregnant woman 6 months prior. And after that event, he developed this belief that he's incapable of rescuing people. So he, as the title suggests, brings in the dead. Nick Cage's character then meets Patricia Arquette's character, Mary, and her father is on the verge of dying, and they form a sweet relationship. Of course, Nick Cage and Patricia Arquette were married. Of course, it didn't last because, you're not marrying the character, you're marrying the person the character is playing, but that's a discussion for a whole other day. Uh, But yeah, Bringing Out the Dead is a deeply intricate character study about Pierce battling his inner demons and coming to terms with himself and his past trauma. It manages to be deeply emotional while also surprisingly hopeful. It's interesting, well, not interesting, sad rather, how both Martin Scorsese and Paul Schrader's wives have health struggles right now. Scorsese's wife of 24 years has Parkinson's, and along with like some sort of degenerative disorder from what I've read. And Paul Schrader's wife, Mary Beth Hurt, who actually plays Nurse Constance in this movie, she's been struggling with Alzheimer's through the past decade. And like uh to in comparison, in this movie, Patricia Arquette's character has to come to terms with the fact that her father's dying, uh and and even though Nick Cage's character is doesn't have any relatives per se. Doesn't have any relatives like close to like shown in the film who are uh, dying in front of him. Uh, he wasn't close with that uh, pregnant woman who he couldn't save. You know, it's still coping with death and loss in a way. And, you know, uh, I just thinking about that, I makes the film all the more resonant, emotionally resonant. And I really think Bringing Out the Dead is one of Scorsese's most underrated movies. It desperately needs a Blu-ray release. Boutique Labels, if you're listening, put this out. Bringing Out the Dead is currently streaming on Amazon Prime and Paramount Plus. And my next pick is another Scorsese film, actually. And it is the 1991 film Cape Fear. Now, can be considered a Noir-vember watch, but I would say that it's fitting for spooky season, too. It's a remake of a 1962 film starring Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum, who make appearances in this version, actually. And, you know, based off of the novel The Executioners by John D. MacDonald. So, Robert De Niro plays a sex offender named Max Cady. He's newly released from a 14-year sentence for raping a 16-year-old girl. Brilliantly, might I add, is the performance by Robert De Niro. So fantastic here. He is so shamelessly devilish in the most unhinged manner. So, and throughout that time in prison, Cady got super stylized tattoos and educated himself with literature. It's funny, one of his tattoos is like a wizard, some kind of like sorcerer or whatever. And and because of that, Max Cady believes himself to be on the level, if not smarter, than an actual lawyer, when in reality, it's pretty amateurish, his newfound intelligence. And, like, obviously he's the villain of the narrative, but there are some things Robert De Niro says in this movie that are so hilarious. For instance, when he discusses his prison education, if you will, he mentions that he read the Spot books, which I put away at work at the library. So, fresh on the streets again, Cady is determined to get revenge on his former defense lawyer, Sam Bowden, played by Nick Nolte, for shielding information that would have vindicated him from imprisonment. And so, Robert De Niro's character starts stalking Nick Nolte's character's family. His wife and daughter are played by wonderfully by Jessica Lange and Juliette Lewis. Really, both they're just fantastic here. Nick Nolte and Jessica Lange's marriage is troubled. Nick Nolte's character has had some infidelities, as Jessica Lange puts it. And of course, a situation like this sort of forces the family to come together in a desperate survival situation. This was an Amblin production, Steven Spielberg's production company. Wasn't produced by Spielberg, but produced by Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy. So it has the vibe of adventure movies from that time period while also paying homage to thrillers of the 60s. I was texting my brother that I watched this movie and how awesome Juliette Lewis was in her 90s performances, to which he said, "Yeah, I know, classic 90s daughter." And like that's so true. And even like in her room, it's such like a typical like 90s teenage girl room. So then De Niro preys upon Juliette Lewis's character by trying to philosophically appeal to Gen X angst. And it's what I would imagine a boomer's generalized idea of what Gen X sensibilities are with limited understanding. And Nick Nolte's character becomes so paranoid to the point where his dynamic with De Niro pretty much becomes a cat and mouse chase. And then, as I said, a survival story. Uh, and this movie's awesome. Uh, you can rent it for a few dollars on Amazon Prime, and it's on DVD and Blu-ray. So, next up is The Horror Express from 1972, directed by Eugenio Martin. Now, it is sort of a loose adaptation of the novella, the basis for the 1951 film The Thing from Another World, and John Carpenter's The Thing. An anthropologist named Alexander Saxon, played by Christopher Lee, and his partner slash rival, Dr. Wells, played by Peter Cushing, are riding to the Trans-Siberian Express through Manchuria. Telly Savalas, who many of you may know, whom some of you may know as Blofeld in the old James Bond flicks, is Captain Kazan. Also boarding the train is a count and a countess, and an Orthodox monk, Father Pujardov. I bear with me for mispronunciation. Dr. Saxon is carrying with him a frozen specimen which he discovered. He is convinced that it is a Sasquatch figure. It turns out that this missing link is a host to a parasitic extraterrestrial creature that wreaks havoc amongst the train passengers. It's up to Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing's characters to put aside their rivalry and defeat this monster. It's a lot of fun. The production design of the train here is actually pretty cool. Somebody on Letterboxd described it as The Thing meets Snowpiercer, Jeepers Creepers, and Train to Busan. And the train setting gives it a claustrophobic feel, thereby adding to the horror. Beyond the horror elements, my favorite thing about this movie is the survival aspect, especially with the bantering between Lee and Cushing. Truthfully, there's some cleverly funny dialogue amongst all the characters. Horror Express is available to watch for free on YouTube and Tubi, and if you have the Arrow streamer, you can watch it there. Next up is Mad Monster Party from 1967, directed by Jules Bass. The Rankin and Bass team. They made some your favorite holiday specials like Santa Claus Coming to Town, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and Frosty the Snowman. So this movie is stop motion, set on the Isle of Evil, home of the World Organization of Monsters. Dr. Baron Boris von Frankenstein, voiced none other than by Boris Karloff, announces his retirement from creating monsters. He gathers together a group of monsters around the globe to a convention. Other than Dr. Frankenstein's own famous monster, who's named Fang here, other party guests range from the creature from the Black Lagoon, Dracula, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Quasimodo the Hunchback, and the Invisible Man. Fang has a higher functioning female romantic partner, voiced, like a Bride of Frankenstein, voiced by Phyllis Diller, with that famous laugh. I don't know if I could emulate it perfectly, but you might know her from hearing her laugh. So at the convention, Dr. Frankenstein introduces a formula for obliteration and reveals his intention to pick a successor. So, like Succession. So, Dr. Frankenstein has a gorgeous red-haired assistant named Francesca. She desires the position herself. The Baron's successor is actually his nephew Felix. Felix is a bit aloof. He's asthmatic and meek. He's a Jimmy Stewart type. He's not voiced by Jimmy Stewart, but the man voicing him does an impression. And Francesca and the other monsters devise a scheme to win access to the Baron's formula. Things start to change when Francesca and Felix begin to like each other, and it becomes, once again, a survival story surrounding them. It's a super fun hidden gem. The stop motion and set design is fantastic. It's also a good gateway to introduce kids to classic monster movies without traumatizing them. I'm surprised people don't talk about it as much when they when, like when talking about the Rankin and Bass specials, and it's also not played. It wasn't really. I haven't seen it played on TV as much. It's on DVD. It is on DVD and Blu-ray. So see if you can get it from your library. Um, and whether that be there or an interloan. Otherwise, you can rent it for a few dollars on Prime, Apple TV, YouTube, and Google Play. So that's Mad Monster Party. Next up is The Others from 2001, directed by Alejandro Amenabar. In this gothic supernatural story set in 1945, a religious mother named Grace, played excellently by Nicole Kidman, lives with her children, Anne and Nicholas, in an estate set on the Channel Island of Jersey. Not New Jersey, Jersey in the UK. The children are photosensitive, or so Grace believes. She homeschools Anne and Nicholas, particularly with religious morality tales. New servants arrive. Mrs. Mills, played by Fionnuala Flanagan, who some of you may recognize from Waking Ned Devine. Mr. Tuttle, played by Eric Sykes, who was like a British comedian, and Lydia, played by Elaine Cassidy. Anne and Nicholas begin to see ghosts. I don't want to reveal any more about the plot because there's a super jaw-dropping twist that I do not want to spoil for those of you who haven't seen it. It's gothic, eerie, and unsettling, while also being deeply compassionate and empathetic. The production design of the house here is gorgeous. Benjamin Fernandez who's a production designer here, also did production design for True Romance. I love the cinematography by Javier Aguirre-Sarobe, who shot Talk to Her and Amenabar's previous film, The Sea Inside. The use of light and shadows here is extra nerve-wracking, knowing that the children could get burnt if they're exposed to the sun. Again, at least that's what Nicole Kidman's character believes. Props play such an important part in the narrative. Like, if you go back and rewatch it or just think back on it a second time, you'll realize why certain props were utilized the way they were. And also, it's like that with lines of dialogue. And the editing is genius in the way it pulls sleight of hands, making you think one way before the major twist happens. On that note, what's great about the screenplay is that it has so many callbacks, not to mention the subtle foreshadowing in the dialogue. The performances are excellent. This is one of my favorite Nicole Kidman performances. The kids here are really good too. Unfortunately, The Others is annoyingly not available to stream anywhere, but it is available on DVD and Blu-ray. Criterion recently put it out. See if it's at your library, otherwise get an interloan, as I always say. And then next up, the 1-2 punch from director Todd Haynes, Poison, 1991, and Safe from 1995. Let's talk about Poison first. Now, Poison is a collection of 3 intercut narratives, all of which start with the letter H. Hero, Whore, and Homo. One is a fictional true crime documentary called Hero, concerning a boy named Richie who shot his father at 7 years and then flew out the window. He's been missing since, and we see interviews with the family members about what led up to the shooting. The horror segment is literally called Whore. The story follows a mad scientist who invents this sexual enhancement elixir. After drinking it, his skin becomes disfigured. The skin condition is contagious. And interestingly, Safe from I will talk about that next. Todd Haynes' follow-up film also touches on a supposedly contagious skin condition. The third story, Homo, this is a romance between 2 men in prison. Todd Haynes loosely adapts the writings of Jean Genet, I don't know how to pronounce it, including The Thief's Journal, Our Lady of the Flowers, and Miracle of the Rose. All 3 of these stories examine ostracism and the effect it has on outcast characters. Todd Haynes, being part of the LGBTQ community, provides an authentic and empathetic perspective on the matter. Stylistically, Poison is very inventive. As I said earlier, Hero is shot like an old television special that would have aired in the 80s or the 90s. Homo is shot like a classic melodrama, and Todd Haynes in his films has um paid homage to that. I have yet to watch it, but I know that Far From Heaven is, I believe, is a remake of Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows. And uh or what? And horror is shot like a classic monster movie. Poison is truly an impressive debut, and I'm uh, and earlier I brought up Safe. Todd Haynes calls this film of his a horror movie of the soul. Safe is about a wealthy housewife named Carol White, who, on the surface, seems to have everything: beautiful looks, a loving husband, and a stepson, and equally fancy lady friends. In spite of appearing to have it all, Carol, who I forgot to mention, is played wonderfully by the amazing Julianne Moore. So, in spite of appearing to have it all, Carol experiences a level of disconnect. She starts getting ill, symptoms being headaches and rashes. The big wake-up call indicating that something isn't right is a pretty dire seizure. Carol believes that her symptoms are a result of sensitivities to chemicals and polluted air. At one point, I believe she says that she's allergic to the 20th or the 21st century, and her anxiety over her health escalates to the point where daily functioning becomes a struggle. Carol then goes to a new age commune called Wrenwood. This place is designed to help the environmentally ill heal their minds, bodies, and souls. Safe satirizes the rise of self-help culture, and a lot of the story was a response to the AIDS crisis in the 1980s and the anxiety and dread that many faced. I'm sure Todd Haynes, as a member of the queer community, possibly faced himself even. I mean, I can't speak for him because I haven't interviewed him or anything, but that's what I was thinking. Todd Haynes masterfully balances both the satire and the emotional dread. And I would love to see Todd Haynes make another horror adjacent film. Poison is available to watch on Amazon Prime, and there's a Kino Lorber Blu-ray. Safe is not available to stream for free, but you can rent for a few dollars on Amazon, and there's a Criterion Blu-ray. And watching Poison and Safe all the more made me excited for May, December, coming to Netflix in December. Next up is The Queen of Spades from 1949, directed by Thorold Dickinson, who directed the original Gaslight, the British one. So, The Queen of Spades. This is based off of a short story by renowned Russian author Alexander Pushkin. Captain Herman Suverin, played by Anton Walbrook, learns through fellow military officer friends about Countess Rainveskaya, played by Edith Evans, an old woman who became a card champion after selling her soul to Satan in her younger years. In order to learn the Countess's gambling secrets, he basically stalks her lovely female ward, Lizaveta Ivanova, played by Yvonne Mitchell. However, she's already being pursued by Andre, Ronald Howard, a fellow soldier buddy of Herman. Even though Herman and Andre are both pining for the same woman, the conflict has less to do with a love triangle and more to do with Herman's obsessive desire for wealth. And the beautiful cinematography and production design almost looks like imagery from a card deck, a black and white one, of course. The performances are fantastic. It's a hauntingly eerie morality tale. The film sort of depicts life as a game. Those who try to succeed through dishonest means will be disqualified from the game. And if you love gothic romances, I think you're in for a treat with The Queen of Spades. It's on Blu-ray, and you can watch it on Canopy. And next up is The Unknown from 1927, directed by Todd Browning. Alonzo, played by Lon Chaney, puts on the front of being an armless circus performer who is talented at gun shooting and throwing knives. The truth is that he's an on-the-run criminal who actually has arms. His left hand has sort of a double thumb. And that is the key criminal identification point for the police. Alonzo is deeply infatuated with the circus owner's daughter, Nanan, played by Joan Crawford. Zanzi, the circus owner, obviously can't stand Alonzo. And Nanan is, I believe, the daughter, or the bodybuilder of the circus, Malabar, played by Norman Carey, is in love with Nanan. At first, Nanan is afraid of him because of her fear of strong arms. She associates it with men groping and touching her, but then she eventually warms up. I don't want to reveal any more of the plot because then I would get into spoiler territory. But Lon Chaney is just astonishing here. His facial expressions alone are chilling. He's monstrous while also bringing a sympathetic humanity. Obviously, Alonzo does not necessarily make good decisions, for he's a murderer. More than anything, what he wants is love. Obviously, of course, this does not justify his decisions because the ways of him going about that are a violent threat to other people. It is a love triangle dynamic that sort of reminds me of the Phantom of the Opera, in that we sympathize with the monster/beast figure who sort of goes mad, even though the gentler man is the better match for the woman of interest. And this is ironic to bring up because Malabar is the circus strongman. And the funniest part about this on this subject is that I didn't even mention the fact that in the 1925 Phantom of the Opera film, Lon Chaney played the Phantom and Norman Carey played Raoul. On top of that, in the 1923 Hunchback of Notre Dame, Lon Chaney played the titular hunchback and Norman Carey played Phoebus. New Bev, if you're listening, please program Phantom of the Opera, The Unknown, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame as a triple bill. I really don't have much else to say about The Unknown other than that it is an under-discussed silent era classic. It is available to watch on Tubi. I believe Criterion put out a Todd Browning collection. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did. And finally, we're gonna end it with a comedy. Vampires in Havana from 1985, directed by Juan Padron. This is a Cuban adult animated film. The setting is 1930s Havana, Cuba. Dr. Werner Amadeus von Dracula creates a special potion called Vampazole. This provides vampires with the capability to be in the sunlight. Von Dracula makes the grand declaration that he'll give away vials of Vampazole to vampires on an international scale. The Chicagoan vampire mafia and the Dusseldorf vampire gang from the Eastern European area intend on grabbing this potion for themselves. Similar to the Mad Monster Party, there's a formula that others want to steal. Not only that, the mad scientist has a nephew at the center of it all. Great, this would make a great double feature. Von Dracula's nephew, Joseph, aka Pepito or Pepe, has been the test subject for the formula experimentations. He's a trumpeter in a band and has plans of overthrowing the Cuban government. What is so funny yet is that Pepe doesn't even know yet that his uncle's a vampire, and Joseph and his girlfriend get caught up in the manhunt. This film is a lot of fun. It's quite satirical. I wonder if or when Juan Padron was coming up with this, if he took any inspiration with like the rise of opioids and like drug smuggling. But yeah, this is a recommendation from me. If you like adult animated films in the vein of like Fritz the Cat or and like Ralph Bakshi stuff, I think you should give this a try. Vampires in Havana is available to watch on YouTube. Well, my friends, thank you for watching. I hope you all have a great Halloween, and and days leading up to it. Uh, so uh, the links to my socials are in the description below. Happy Halloween. Goodbye for now.